I've got 45 years experience in the field of entertainment, and I'm here to share with you some of the greatest talents and experience in clubland and entertainment by learning from each other. Please, I ask you to subscribe to my channel to be able to produce more great content like this. My guest today, I am highly pleasured to announce a gentleman you will all know by some of the famous bands he's been in. I'd like to say hello to Ted Key.
Hello, Shaun.
Yes, Ted Key. Wow. So I think most of all, when you look on the internet and you type in the Housemartins, your name comes up. Yeah.
Well, it does, yeah.
All the time. So you've got a big history with those. Can you tell us, Ted, what got you started into the music business?
First of all, it was I was born in 1960, so I was sort of old enough to remember a lot of the songs from the 60s. And then it was like radio, a transistor radio, or even a valve radio in the corner of the living room. No telly. So I remember a tin bath in the scullery, getting bathed and hearing the music on the radio. And that was just all part of my life, and it was on constantly. My mum loved singing. There was no tradition of being musicians in my family, but I think at the time, and we were speaking off there about how important music was in the 80s, it was the centre of the culture. And there was a route into the music industry, which involved, you could do covers, you could do original music, you could get signed to a label. But I only learnt that later on. So I think my first guitar, my dad was a dustman for 30 years.
Wow.
And he brought home my first guitar that he'd found in a dustbin. And it only had 4 strings on. And I thought it was broken, so I didn't use it. But I was obsessed with Pete Townsend at the time. So when they'd gone out, I think I was about 12 or 13 or 14. When they'd gone out, I smashed the guitar up in the garden to see what it felt like. And I can tell you now, it feels horrible. Horrible. It was a big white semi-acoustic guitar, no electrics in it. And I smashed it to bits. And I thought, what an idiot. Because I was influenced by The Who and I love Pete Townsend and I saw him smashing guitars. Well, let me tell you now, it is not fun. There is nothing fun about it for maybe a fraction of a second. Anyway,
unless you're a millionaire, Ted, and you can afford to do that. Yeah.
Well, luckily, my dad was a dustman and he found me another one. So the second one was an electric guitar. And so I took it to bits and it was, they had no scratch plates. I took it to bits and the body was broken. It was like a Fender Strat copy. So I took the body into woodwork at Henry Cooper High School one day. And, a couple of the teachers then were really into the music. There was Mick Jones in the maths department who was in folk bands. And one of my best friends at school, Paul Tracy, played bass for him in his folk band. Anyway, I took my guitar in and I asked him if in woodwork I could make a new body for it. So that's what I did. I made a new body for it, put it all back together, and it actually worked.
Wow.
So,
another Brian May.
not quite as good as Brian May.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about the music industry, one side of it, when I was young, in Hull, there was a lot of working men's clubs. And it was the 60s and 70s. So they were working men's clubs as opposed to, working persons clubs. And there was a lot of, a lot of clubs wanted cover bands, and that be part of the entertainment. So when I was at school, at Henry Cooper High School, there was Dave Rotheray, who went on to do The Beautiful South. There was Dave Hemingway, who went on to do the Housemartins and The Beautiful South. There was Hugh Whitaker, who played with me in the Gargoyles and went with me from the Gargoyles to the Housemartins. And in that, there was enough musicians to sort of start a club band, a covers band. But I didn't play well enough at the time. So what I did, I went round as a roadie. So I went in, took the gear, carried the gear in, set it up for them, and they'd play at working men's clubs. So I suppose that's my first introduction to the music industry.
Wow, very interesting. I suppose that's a great story because it's give you a good grounding. Then what happened then? Did you kind of like practice, or?
Well, I was very good at school. I did A levels, and then I went to university.
Yeah.
To do I think it was chemistry and history and philosophy of science, but I changed to maths after a bit. But you see, I was so involved in music, I got into the entertainment committee, and they would put on bands. And the guy who led the entertainment committee at the time was Andy Kershaw, who's a very well-known DJ in England. And, you know, he's on Radio 1 all the time. He does his own shows, very much into world and folk music. But he was the main entertainment officer. So he would book all these bands. And I would work for the Enter Committee just as like a dog's body. So, you know, I saw The Clash at Leeds University. I saw The Police at Leeds Polytechnic. I saw Dire Straits at Leeds Polytechnic. The Jam, Ian Dury and the Blockheads, the Ramones, Elvis Costello. You know, so all these bands were constantly touring. And you know, at the time, one of the central things for bands was the New Musical Express. So if you're writing original music, you would try and get your stuff into the New Musical Express or get your gigs reviewed by the New Musical Express. And that was a sort of first step on the ladder to, you know, getting your music heard by lots of people, which is, you know, all we want to do as a writing musician, as a songwriter, is have people listen to the music, you know.
Yeah. The NME was a great mag. You know, it was full of, you know, talent, full of great stories, full of great reviews, you know, absolutely smashing. So you kind of like, when did you first go live with your band?
Well, the Gargoyles was really my first band.
Right.
Now, if people haven't heard of the Gargoyles, they were a whole band from about 1981 to 1988, I think. And they comprised of myself on guitar. There was Hugh Whitaker on drums, Hugh Whitaker of the Housemartins. There was Paul Warhurst on bass guitar. And then there was Eddie Smith as a lead singer. And Eddie was a lyricist, wrote lyrics. And I sort of made them into songs because they were often like there were not enough lines or too many lines, or there was no chorus, and you know, you weren't quite sure of the melody. So we worked together like that, and really Paul was involved in that as well as a bass player. But you know, he wasn't. I taught him how to play the bass, just rudimentary bass playing, and he took it.
Who's that?
Sorry.
Who are you talking about? Sorry,
I'm talking about Paul Warhurst, who was the bass player in the Gargoyles.
Okay.
And I sort of taught him as we went along.
Wow.
And he became quite accomplished, but he only ever used 2 fingers on the bass. We used to call him Count Two-Fingered Warhurst.
Oh, stories, we love them.
Yeah, but I mean, that band was a very sort of strange band. It wasn't a straight band. It was almost like a satirical band. So we used to write songs about very strange subjects. We wrote one about Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay.
We wrote another one about the gas man.
Okay.
Loves the gas man. When he comes for your meter money, he always does it with a smile on his face. If he has any kiddies, he winks at them. And it was just like bizarre. What made us laugh? There was another song about Bing Crosby being a fish.
Oh. So all original music then, yeah?
All original music, apart from a couple of covers. We used to do this very bizarre version of Barbara Ann by the Beach Boys. But it was mainly to let Eddie improvise ridiculous lyrics. And the other song we used to do Crazy Horses by the Osmonds. Because it's such a rocking song. Crazy Horses.
Yeah, you're right. So then what did you develop into after that, after the Gargoyles?
Well, we're talking about 1983, 84. Yep. So after a while, there was the other members of the Gargoyles, apart from Hugh. Hugh did a lot of cover band work. But Paul and Eddie sort of really did it for the crack, you know. But I was a bit more serious. So I was always saying, look, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. And then we had a guy called John Rowley from a whole band called the Red Guitars, who did really well in the sort of the early 80s. They supported the Smiths. Their single Good Technology was John Peel's #1 in his festive 50.
Wow.
And they've actually just reformed. But John Rowley always liked the Gargoyles. But there wasn't that drive there to actually go out and get your music out. I mean, we did do a lot of gigs, but in '84, I saw the Housemartins play as a duo.
Oh.
And
so who was the two members?
the two members at the time were Paul Heaton and Stan Cullimore.
Okay.
Stan, whose real name is Ian, but Paul had a tendency to rename people if he thought the names weren't rock and roll enough. Which is all right, you know. So I saw him play a few times. And then I was at a gig at the Tower nightclub in Hull. I think it was like multiple local bands were playing. So I think we might have been playing, and the Housemartins were doing it as a duo. And I'd seen them, and I thought, they've got something here. The vocals are good, the harmonies are great, the songs are simple and catchy, and there's a real sort of passion to go and do things. So I was chatting to Paul, and he said, "Oh, we're thinking about expanding to a full band. Do you know any bass players?" And I says, "I can play bass." Didn't have a bass guitar at the time, but you know, how hard can it be? There's fewer strings.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Well, do you know a drummer?" And I says, "I know a very good drummer. He's in my band. It's called Hugh Whitaker." So I went to Hugh and said, "Do you fancy doing some of this? Because I think they're serious about it." And so in '84, we started writing and rehearsing new songs for the Housemartins.
Wow.
And rehearsing a little house down Grafton Street.
Yeah.
Grafton Street in Hull. Was it 70 Grafton Street? I think it was. It's either 70 Grafton Street or 70 De Grey Street. De Grey Street was the Adelphi Club.
Yeah.
So I think it was Grafton Street, because there was a pub down there that Paul always loved.
Yeah.
It's like a local down-to-earth pub. So, yeah, that's how it started in the Housemartins for me.
And what was your first hit with Paul Heaton?
Hit in terms of songs?
Song, yeah.
Well, we recorded an EP, which was 4 tracks, which the main one was called Flag Day. Right. And then there was a couple, I think, Sitting on a Fence. There was a song called Coal Train to Hatfield, Maine, because at the time it was the miners' strike, and we were always quite a political band, and we supported the miners and did a lot of benefit gigs for the miners. So we went into the Townhouse in London and recorded those 4 tracks. But unfortunately, things had sort of deteriorated from my point of view within the band, because they refused to give me songwriting credits on songs that I believed I'd contributed to. So that became an issue. And another big issue, which is stupid when I think back on it, but Paul had moved to Hull because he lived down south. I think it was in Surrey, in Dorking, where his mum and dad lived. And he'd come up to Hull with his girlfriend and a guy called Ray Barry, who I can only remember his name because he was always called Trotsky. He was quite left-wing as well. Anyway, the 3 of them moved to Hull, and then Paul and his girlfriend split up, but they still lived in the same house. So then I came along, and things happened, and I started seeing Sue, his ex-girlfriend. Oh, no. Which, you know, you can imagine, can't you?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
You know. So there was, on one hand, there was the songwriting things. On the other hand, there was the way Paul was sort of reacting to me and Sue being together. Oh, and in the end, I said to him, "Look, I want to record the album, and I want to tour the album, because that's what I've been doing this 18 months, and I think that's what I deserve. But after that, I'm going to reassess and think about it." So they said, "Okay, yeah, that's fine, Ted." And they went down to London, just the 2 of them, saw the record label, came back, and I was out of the band. And that was it, really.
Well, I
You know,
suppose it's a good memory, Ted.
no, it's a good memory. It certainly was a good memory. I mean, we did gigs all up and down the country, and
Wow.
things were great in the band for a long time. I got on really well with Stan. His sense of humour was great. Paul was a very sort of, he liked to gang around him, and when you were in his gang, it was fun. It was a good laugh. And traveling places and doing things. We were in our 20s, but also when you're in your 20s, you're a bit headstrong. And I thought, well, if I'm not going to get the credit that I'm deserving here, I'm going to restart the Gargoyles. So to go back to your question, we recorded that Flag Day single, and
yeah,
I think that charted in the independent charts.
okay,
And then I left the band, or was kicked out of the band at the end of 1985. They went in the studio and recorded all the songs that I've been playing with Norman Cook, who copied all of my bass lines. Note for note, copied every single bass line. And then they took some ideas that we'd been playing with, and I'd brought this chord progression, and we were working on that. And that became Happy Hour. So not only was it a massive hit for them, I didn't get any credit on it either. So, I was saying earlier about what a nasty business the music business can be.
Yeah.
They wanted to be Lennon and McCartney. That was the gold standard. So they went on the middle of the little vinyl record, still vinyl back then. They wanted to say Heaton Cullimore, not Heaton Cullimore Key or Cullimore or whatever Heaton Key, which one of the songs was. But they just wanted it like that. And I think it really showed on the second album when Norman had to come up with bass lines and they were dull. Because the important thing about that band, Stan was a rhythm guitarist, not a lead guitarist. And I was a rhythm and lead guitarist. And I think he was a bit intimidated by me being in the band in the first place.
Wow.
So what I thought when I joined the band was the bass is going to carry a certain amount of the melody line, rather than just playing dum, 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 dum. I was going dum, da, 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 dum, dum, da, da, dum, da, da. And I was adding a certain thing with that bass. It's the same thing as Bruce Foxton out the Jam. It's the same thing as Andy Rourke in the Smiths. They've subsequently sued bands for not getting the royalties that they deserve. And it does. I struggled for years with my mental health because I didn't achieve the success in the music business that I was hoping for. And at 30, I retrained and became a maths teacher, Wow. So, but it was always in the back of my mind, and it took me a long time to come to terms with missing out being at the centre of a very successful band.
How did you feel when you saw hit after hit after hit in the charts with the Housemartins? Did it make you feel?
Well, we were releasing albums with the Gargoyles then and touring, and we were just on the edge of, on the cusp of things. And we were getting reviews in the NME, and we were getting this, and we were doing that, But from 85 to 88, that's what I did for 3 years.
Wow.
And, well, if anybody listening has ever been in a band, you will know that it's worse than a marriage, because you don't have sex. You just have arguments. You just have arguments all the time. And it's full on egos, full on young men wanting to, be the cock of the walk. Yeah. And there's always trouble in bands, no matter who the band is.
You're right.
So, I can look back on it and take the things that I can out of it. But really the way I deal with it myself is I don't listen to any of that stuff anymore. I don't listen to any of the beautiful South stuff. Partly because they're so damn catchy. It's like an earworm. As soon as you hear like Rotterdam or something, it's in there and you can't get it out of your head. So I tend to avoid it. I even walk out of shops if it's music playing in the background. I don't put myself in a position where I go down that route to be sat on my own thinking, why wasn't I a successful musician?
Well,
and I've learned to take out the positive things from writing songs, and I know what writing songs does for me. It takes me back to a time when I was in Paul's attic with Eddie and Paul writing stupid songs together. It takes me back to a time when we were in Stan's little flat on Pearson Park, looking out of the window, writing Flag Day, and, you know, hoping that things were going to be a hit.
Yeah.
You know, and it's those magical things that not many people experience.
Correct.
That I can take away from it. And the other thing is, actually being creative and writing a song is very good for your mental health, very good for your well-being, because you create something that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
You know, and what I tend to do is I write story songs.
Oh.
So, you know, and I think that comes from the Gargoyles, really. I like it to be a story from the beginning to the end, and an interesting middle section, and a singable chorus. That's what I like.
That's fantastic. So, just to close off on the Housemartin thing, you kind of like, you lost touch. You never been in touch or anything.
Well, I've always been in touch with Hugh,
right?
But the bitterness at the end of the Housemartins meant that I rarely saw either of them. I think I might have seen Stan once, and remember, it's 40 years ago.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Now, I did mention Eddie Smith from the Gargoyles. And sadly, he passed away. He had a number of illnesses, but I think the one that killed him was pancreatic cancer.
Oh, dear.
And you know, I went and saw him when he was very ill, very, very ill. And we just sat there and I held his hand and we talked about the Gargoyles and we talked about all the laughs we'd had, you know. And at his funeral, Paul Heaton came to the funeral. And along with myself was one of the coffin bearers that took him into the chapel. So I said hello to him. I shook his hand. And I says, "Paul, I hope you're all right. You know, how are you doing?" We had a chat.
That's nice.
And then he didn't speak to me again after that.
Okay. Well,
didn't come over. Didn't say anything. Yeah. And actually, the one of the most annoying things, a few years ago, they had a secret reunion gig with the Housemartins at the Adelphi. Right? They didn't ask me. Yeah. Nobody told me that it was happening. I found out through a third party, and even the people at the Adelphi didn't get in touch with me. So, you know, I won't swear on your podcast. So
no, these things happen, Ted. Yeah, it's.
Yeah, I just thought, you know what? People like that, do I want them in my life?
No.
People like that in my life? Yes, I want recognition. Yes, I want people to listen to my music. But do I need somebody who's going to do that to me after 40 years?
Yeah, correct. Well, Ted, at least, you know, we've got it out in the air. You know, the people who's going to listen to this podcast will hear the true story. You know, it's nice.
Well, everybody's got their own truth now, haven't they?
Yes, they have. Everybody believes.
You know, people put out a biography, and I couldn't read it. I couldn't go and look at it. But I did look. I did go into Smith's and look in the back for references to me. And I lasted about 30 seconds. I went, no, this is no good. That's taking me down a blind alley. I don't want to do it. Yeah, so but I walked away. Just before
we started this podcast, I kind of like typed in here the Housemartins members, and it comes up with Paul Eaton, Fatboy Slim, I don't know why, Stan Colmore, Dave Hemingway, Hugh Walker, Chris Lang, and yourself. And Justine Patrick. So, you know, you're there for everybody to see. So it proves that you actually did a bit of what you did.
And to be fair to them, although I'm quite bitter, and I have to deal with that myself. Yeah. In '88, when they did split up, they put together an album, because they only did 3 albums, and the last one was a compilation. Okay. And on that compilation, they included some of the songs that I'd played on and written. Yeah. And they also included some of the photographs that I had actually taken as publicity photographs.
Oh, wow.
So that first album, Whole New London 4, the cover photograph of the album, I'm just to the left of Paul Heaton.
Wow.
and the photographs on the last album, I took them in Stan's flat, you know, on a delay camera thing, to use as publicity for Go Discs. And Go Discs asked me to send them down the negatives, which I did. Never got them back. Never got paid for being a photographer on the first single and the last album. Didn't see a penny. However, I did see some money from it. and they did arrange for me to get 2 gold discs.
Wow.
So I've got 2 gold discs out of that. One for the first album for my songwriting credits, and one for the last one for songwriting credits and performance.
That's awesome, Ted. I'm pleased to hear that.
They did, think about me.
Yeah. So nice to be recognised in the end.
Well, it's, the 2 of my most treasured possessions.
I understand that. One man is my guitar and my podcast.
Yeah.
Ted, I'm sure that me and you could talk all night, but I don't like to keep the podcast too long because I want to keep the interest for the viewers.
Yeah.
I'd like to say on behalf of what you've said, it's been absolutely electrifying. It's really interesting, Ted. I'm sure a lot of people will learn from it because this podcast is all about learning from each other, sharing stories and things like that. So I'd like to say, Ted Key, ex-Housemartins, brilliant musician, fantastic fella, great mathematician. Thank you very much, Ted.
You're very welcome. And there's a lot more things that we could talk about if you want to do another podcast.
Yes, let's do it.
I ran my own record label.
Right.
I did. I'm still playing with Ted Key plus VIPs.
Right.
So if you can give us a plug for that, it's all over. It's all over YouTube. We've got a Facebook page. If you search Ted Key, you'll get.